Welcome to LYLAS. If you grew up in the 90s, you probably know what that stands for. But if not, we love you like a sis. So, welcome to, I'm not even sure what episode this is. Episode, you know better than I do.
I think that
Track of this stuff.
overall, yeah, well, sort of. I think that it's still a number. Overall, I think it's episode 32, so that would put us at season 2, episode 12
Well,
or
yeah.
13. Yeah, it's a
I
long
wonder
12 or
if,
13.
and I wonder if we should have just like kept it going instead of restarting at season two, episode one, if we should have just kept counting the episodes so that we can keep track because I think both of us have a goal of making it to 100. Like we were
Yeah.
like, could you imagine if we actually recorded 100 legitimate episodes and published them? So I don't know. I'll do a head count today and see
Yeah, and if you're
where we're at.
listening, give us a shout out on our social media and tell us what you think too. Do you prefer to have it broken down into seasons or total numbers? So we'll get some viewer feedback on this one
Yeah,
too.
take a
Always
poll.
good. Take a poll.
Take a poll. So today's episode, maybe an unpopular opinion for some. I don't know. I'm actually excited to talk to you about this because I feel like we're probably aligned on some things, but maybe have some different perspectives on other things. So
Hmm.
today's podcast is about allowing children to experience hardships
Yes.
or difficulties or just experience a range of emotions in life. Um, and so we're going to chat about some of that and what we've observed over the years. Sarah has a grown child. She's now parenting a young child again, so she's getting round two of
Mm.
it. I'm parenting two young kids at this time, but I've worked with kids for the last 16 years and parents for the last 16 years. So I feel like I have a lot to say about this, but
Hmm.
you do too, because you've also experienced this for the last 20 years, roughly.
Yeah, something like that. And then in my practice, I would see adolescents as well.
Okay.
And I worked within a juvenile research or uh, level facility that for a period of time too. And so those kids had some, different things that were kind of going on as a part of it. But hopefully, you guys have seen or heard about this article because it is all over different forms of social media. I've come across it several times on my Apple News feed, which is where I get a lot of different things. Again, remember, I'm just going for quick bits of information here, folks. And it the one that we're going to reference and the one that's going to be on our website is from the Huffington Post. And so if you're interested in really reading this, not just hearing like our oral summary of all of it, again, check out the link on our website because it'll really go over this stuff pretty in depthly. Um, but yeah, there's this whole idea and concept that I guess has started with maybe our parenting generation, is what the kind of research is showing, that we are just taking so much responsibility for our child's happiness and feeling like they should always be happy and have this happy childhood and happy experiences because the world's such a bad place. And so we got to make sure they're happy, 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 you know, and that's just not healthy, is I think the fairest thing to kind of say, because that's not reflective of life in its greater sense. And, to the article's point too, it says that if we are always focused on happiness essentially, then we never learn how to cope with distressing situations or emotions. And that is 100, in my opinion, I'm going to take an opinion and now turn it to fact. That is fact from what I've seen. So,
Well, I think the research also supports the fact that kids are reporting higher levels of depression. Kids are reporting more suicidal ideation than they were 20 years ago. It
yeah.
could be that people didn't report those things or they weren't taking those measures, but ultimately they're seeing a growth. I think that article referenced like 30% of kids in
Mm-hmm.
2020 had some um, suicidal ideation. And so we have to take that obviously very seriously when
Mm-hmm.
kids are considering, ending their life because of distressing emotions that they're experiencing. And so I think that's really where the focus comes into how does this affect our
Mm-hmm.
kids? It's great for kids to have a wonderful childhood, right? That's what we're all trying to give our kids. Um, but we need to also teach them, how to put habits or practices in place to have
Hmm.
healthy mental wellness. We really
Yeah.
focus on their physical fitness a lot of the times, but we don't think about their mental fitness.
Right.
I know that I didn't. And so, when we were kind of talking about this when we first got on here, you were like, when I was a parent, I let my
Hmm.
experience these things. And I understand that and I get that. I think for the way that I could relate to this article, so I'm going through some of the stuff and I'm like, I'm definitely guilty of some of these things we're going to talk about today. Um, because I think we all want to give our kids a better childhood than we had. And
Hmm.
if you experienced any kind of trauma in your childhood or, you know, just any kind of real hardships, you don't want that for your kid. You don't want them to have to go through something so significant that it's going to later potentially impact their mental health as they get older and something
Hmm.
that they're going to have to work on for a long time. And so I think for me, that's where a lot of it comes from. But I would like to think that I've made a lot of progress in the last few years in that I am trying to let them experience things
Hmm.
that are difficult or hard or just like that range of emotions and not try to fix it all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I think that that's the key point. And before we go like too deep into this whole conversation, because I can imagine some people sitting back and thinking, well, there's been social media and there's been COVID, so this is the reason for the increase in these things.
Mm.
That's not true. Even, I don't know if you remember this or not, but even whenever we were in high school, like plus 20 years ago, there were these surveys that we had to take that were about our behaviors and our thoughts and emotions. Like, are we smoking? Are we drinking? Or whatever else. And then, the government or agencies, in order to be able to get grants to help to support mental health treatment, always have to report their numbers and their demographics of people seeking help. And so, again, this is kind of like a longitudinal thing that we've been able to see this huge upcrease in mental health distress for children and adolescents. And yes, here's point one, we did see a spike in this whenever social media started to come out and everything became very pervasive. So that was already accounted for whenever we're talking about this article. And the opinions of some of the professionals they consulted with. And the second thing was, did COVID make anything better? No, it did not. But again, the issue is that this whole idea of us assuming responsibility for our child's happiness was starting to increase before these things were prevalent
Mm-hmm.
within our society. And since then, our focus to fix the problems of social media or to fix the problems that have emerged from COVID, again, has maybe subconsciously or whatever, put more pressure on maybe us as parents or society people to sit there and think, well, they're going through so much on social media. They've already went through so much on COVID. Like, I just gotta, again, kind of, I don't want them to have to deal with this too. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
them to have to kind of cope with these emotions as well, because so much of this other stuff is sucked pretty bad. And now, if I can try to control their happiness or their responses or what they experience in life, then I can at least make this part better.
Yeah.
And that's actually the part that makes it worse.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I totally agree. I've talked to some parents this week that, sometimes it's particularly relating to their academics. Obviously, that's typically when I get involved. And parents will say, well, I just don't want it to become a problem. I'm kind of like reviewing the data and I'm like, well, they're doing well, or and they're like, I know, but I just don't want them to have like a learning disability, and I don't want it to come, obvious become obvious in a couple of years. And so they're like, the phrase I hear all the time is, I want to get on the front end of this. So a
mm-hmm.
lot of the conversations I have are about, kids, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and it's okay not to be great at everything that you try and everything that you do. You're going to be not good at some things. Like you
Mm-hmm.
and I are not good at math.
No.
Like it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of things that I'm not good at personally. And so that's okay. You
Mm-hmm.
really want to focus on what are they good at. You've probably seen that meme that's been on a lot of social media. At least I've seen it now several times, but it's like if your kid has a C in math and has a natural talent for tennis, hire a tennis coach and not a math tutor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so powerful for us to remember that really focusing on someone's strengths versus their weaknesses is really what we should be doing, because the weakness, I mean, sure, you can try to support them in that way. But really focusing on what they're good at is what's going to make them feel good about themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where true happiness comes from, when you truly love who you are for all your faults, all the things, and can experience that real joy in knowing who you are and being okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that one has really resonated with me recently, because I think that there's a lot of things in that article that resonated actually, and just that how we don't allow kids to learn how to cope with any kind of negative emotions. We want to take it away from them, like
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, so that they don't actually have to learn how to cope. And then they're going to become adults, and you're not going to be able to take away all of the negative things that are going to happen to them in life. And so, how are they then supposed to learn to cope in a healthy way? It's probably going to turn to unhealthy habits as a way to cope. To cope, they're going to be drinking a bottle of wine at night. They're going to,
Yeah.
whatever it is, they're going to turn to something else that makes them feel good inside.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I know we're going to break it down and kind of talk about each one of the examples that it gives of things that you can do. But I think just starting with normalizing the fact that there's a range of emotions that humans feel, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. It's okay to feel all those things.
Yes, absolutely. It's not, it's okay, it's fine, it's normal, and in fact, you should. But I think
Mhm.
that there's caution as I was, we'd send a text, about 45
Yeah.
minutes before we jumped online. What are we going to be talking about? And so I got it while I was
True to
running. And
form.
so then, right. And so while I'm running, I'm like, okay, well, what are the things that are, that are kind of stand out to me in this point, or what am I, um, really feeling hard, kind of core about. And it was some of the, again, the things that we're going to talk about, but it comes down to, um, I guess the idea of distress tolerance is
Hmm.
learning how to experience some level of distress and knowing it's okay, but also not saying like certain phrases or words. And, on this podcast, I'm pretty sensitive to those things at times. And like, if you say that this is just a life lesson or that this is going to be a great learning experience, anytime somebody says that to me, I want to kill you. Like, I am practicing a lot of personal self restraint and not, throat punching you at this kind of point in time, right? Um,
Right.
and even though there's truth in that statement, no one
Yeah.
wants to hear that.
When they're going through it, sure.
Hell no. And so
Yeah.
I would just also be mindful that you can validate somebody's emotions
Hmm.
without also kind of putting into the play, well, this is just one of those things you have to go through. This is, there's different ways to kind of to say that. You know what? It sucks really bad right now. And we're just going to have to kind of work through this. So,
Hmm.
what are some ideas that you have as to how you want to kind of work through this situation? Then I'm not solving the problem.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, as a parent, even whenever I was a psychologist, um, I
Which you
did.
still are. You just don't have the practice.
I still have a license at this point in time, and a degree, whatever. Um, but I do not want to be the solution to your problem,
Yeah.
because then that creates a cycle of dependency. And I also don't want to be the person that you come to answer your problems, because
Yeah.
then again, it's not coming organically from within you. And so whenever, I say that, yeah, we just need to kind of work through this. How do you want to work through this
Hmm.
situation? How do you want to work through these emotions? How do you want to address this issue with your friend? And then we can talk through it from there and make it be more of a collateral, guided kind of process
Yeah.
instead of me sitting there saying, well, you know what I think you should do. Again, something nobody wants to hear. No one wants to hear, well, this is just one of life's learning experiences.
Yeah.
No, we're not getting much out of that.
Well, and I think too, sometimes it's hard as parents not to take things personally, right? When your kid's upset
Mhm,
about something, particularly if it's something that you were responsible for. I know that has been a really big learning experience for me personally. I've talked about this in previous episodes, but when I had a fallout with a really good friend,
mm,
our kids were very close. They were like almost like or cousin close, you know? And that's been really hard for my son. And he frequently will ask why he can't see
mhm,
those friends. And, when it first happened and it was super fresh, I used to well, I mean, not almost, I got defensive, because it was like, I was hurt and angry and all, I was still trying to process a lot of those emotions. So if he brought it up, it was really hard for me to kind of sit back and help him process those feelings as well. But
mhm,
over time, it's been a long time now, but over time, now when he brings it up, I'll say, I bet you are angry at mommy, or you're angry at this situation, or I bet, I can understand why you're hurt or why you're
mhm,
sad. And I really focus on validating the feeling, not trying to take it away or say that, someday they're going to be friends again. I
mhm,
don't provide any of that information. I just validate it and then we sit with it, and sometimes it's
mhm.
uncomfortable because a lot of times he'll bring up these things in the car when it's like just he and I on a,
Yeah.
like 30-minute car ride. And it's just like, here we go, silence, because I want him to feel it. Sometimes he
Mhm,
cries. Sometimes, he just looks out the window and I, being a talker, have a really hard time sitting there quietly, but I have learned that I have to let him feel those feelings and process that emotion himself.
mhm,
That I can't solve that for him. And I think that that's hard sometimes, just not to take things personally.
mhm,
I remind myself I am trying to build or trying to raise kids that have positive coping strategies, right?
mhm.
I want to learn from my mistakes in life. And so I think that it's so important just to let them sort of develop their own habits. And I
Mhm.
love that he says it out loud, that he's not sitting back there stewing over something, that he's actually like saying it out loud, like, this makes me angry, or I'm really sad that I don't get to see them anymore.
Yeah. Whenever your kid is able to sit there and express their emotions to you or let you know that they are in some form of distress, that is a sign of the strength and the bond and the attachment that you have with your
Mm,
kid. Not to say that it's not if they're quiet, because especially as teenagers, then they also feel the pressure to put on a happy face for their parents because they know their
mhm,
parents are working so hard to put on, you know what I mean, the kind of happy
mhm.
face. Again, you're modeling the behavior that your kid's then doing, and both of you are miserable. So it's clearly not working. Um, but if they come to you or if you sense something is kind of going on, it is 100% okay to recognize the strength in the relationship, like I said, that you have with Jack in those moments, or me with Cameron or Rachel or whatever our situation may be.
Mm,
But then also to know that in the times in which there's silence, it's just that it's not that it's not there. It just means that we need to tune into it on a different frequency, maybe.
mhm,
Instead of just listening to what is verbally expressed, looking at some of their behaviors to see if there's signs of distress. And then
mhm,
also, as a parent, as a caregiver, as a dad, as an important figure in a child's life, a provider, if you get the spidey sense going on,
mhm.
there's a reason for the spidey sense to be going off. And that's a
Yeah,
cue to kind of be present with that and check in. So those are like the three things that I think are pretty big marks whenever it comes to just maybe even human interaction, but especially whenever it comes to kids.
to kids. And you said something that really I think is important to touch on. I think the article also touches on this, but building that connection with your kids from such an early age, a lot of times I'll have parents say, "Well, I ask them every day how their day went, and they don't tell me anything. I never know what happens at school."
Mhm.
And that's another thing that I think that we just need to be more mindful that when kids have held it all together and followed all the directions and done all the things they've been asked to do for the last 8 hours, they do not want to be peppered with questions the minute they walk in the door, when you see them get off the bus or when you pick them up at the school, whatever it is. So a lot of times just giving them, just, hey, great to see you. And then giving them some time to just breathe,
Mhm.
afterwards. Like we brought our bikes to school. And so on the way home, for like the first 2 or 3 minutes, it's just like silent. And then like as we
Mhm.
start to get, a good like 3 or 4 minutes into the bike ride, all of a sudden they just start telling me about their day. I don't sometimes I don't even have to ask.
Mhm.
Sometimes I do. Like I'll still say, like, how was your day? Anything exciting happen?
Mhm.
Uh, but for the most part, they just kind of like open up. And I think some of that has to do with the fact we're not like staring at each other, And I think always trying to have like those side by side conversations, whether you're walking or riding a bike, whatever you're doing, it's just easier for kids to tell you
Mhm.
things. Um, and then also, I find a really good time for your kids to just spill their guts is laying in bed with them at night, especially if you
Mhm.
have one like my son who doesn't fall asleep right away. I mean, he'll tell me anything. If I just lay there quietly, all of a sudden it's like he'll he'll replay the entire day for me.
Yeah.
Um, or Deep Thoughts by Jack, as I like to say. He'll come
I
up with
love
some
it.
real interesting questions. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, buddy. It's 8:45. That's too late to be thinking about that kind of stuff. It's like his latest is like, what if the world, the planet is alive and we're just like damaging it? It's like, what if it's a real live thing? And I'm like, this is too cerebral for your mind.
Right.
That's a dad question. Hit that one
Right.
up tomorrow morning.
Right.
Um,
Right. I'm going to
but
be up all
have
night long now, kid. Come on.
right. But it's, that's when you really build connection with kids. And that's when they feel safe to talk to you. It may not be the same times for everyone, but I think just giving them a minute to
Mhm.
process their day versus like they just got in the car, like, how was your day? What'd you do today? How was the
Yeah.
math test? Like it will come out if you just give it a
Mhm.
minute.
Yeah. I think asking questions generally just kind of puts people on a spot,
Mm-hmm.
and especially at transition times, I don't know that it seems like it's the best way to fill a situation, but I don't know that it is. So I think silence is very helpful. And I think just making observational statements is helpful too.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you
Yep.
just even, I don't have music on. I don't actually, if fun. I stay by my house. Like
Cool,
if
mom.
I'm right now, I just don't live right, right. Um, I don't listen to music in the car. I don't listen to anything. My house is silent. Like,
So
and
weird.
I know I'm so weird. Even whenever I'm here, like cleaning the house or doing anything else, it is 100% silent. The TV's never on, the radio, no music, no nothing. But that's for me, for whatever reason, that's pretty comforting. I heard things for many years. I don't need to hear anything. I just need things to be silent. But whenever I'm taking the kids someplace in the car, I'll just see if they're quiet. I'll be just making an observation. Gosh, you seem like you're pretty quiet today. And that cues them on that of a behavior that they're doing. I'm not going to ask them a question about it. I'm just going to see where they go with it. And they'll go, yeah, well, I was just thinking about this, or, oh, I didn't realize I was. And so again, it's kind of a neat little way to break into a conversation without putting them on the spot and helping them kind of cue into what's going on in that moment with them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think just sometimes making those observational kind of statements about people can really just be a way to open things up in addition to allowing people just to kind of be who they are in the moment that they're experiencing something,
Yeah.
whatever that is. So,
Yeah, and when they are feeling a certain way, if they're frustrated about something, reminding them that that those feelings serve a purpose, right? Every
hmm,
emotion serves a purpose. Like happiness, it lets you know what you really enjoy in life and what
yeah.
fills your bucket. And sadness lets you know, that something was maybe important to you,
Hmm.
or If you're angry, you were hurt, like most
Mhm.
likely, and fear is a protective factor that something's potentially not safe. And so when we validate those feelings for them and we say, that these are normal feelings, that everybody feels this way, and try to like turn that into a superpower, right? If
Mhm.
you're afraid, it could be for a very good reason. Maybe that's dangerous and you shouldn't be doing it. Or, if you're hurt, or if you're angry, maybe it's because you really feel hurt. Did you get left
Mhm.
out? Like, really trying to help them process that those emotions serve a purpose and that it's okay to actually feel them.
Yes. And it's important to differentiate between emotions too, because sometimes fear is one that you just said and it sticks and just shoots out at me. Because sometimes people associate fear and anxiety as being synonyms, and they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah,
two completely different things. And
that's
so
true.
anxiety is a cognitive thing that is just that's like the train leaving the station and now we are downhill and colliding into everything, derailing everything else. And it's because it has all of these different thoughts that come along with it. Fear is something that is an actual like threat. Anxiety
Mm,
is something that we're creating unintentionally or that just kind of manifests within our head, but they're two
mm-hmm.
separate things. And so being able to differentiate those things with our kids, I think
Mm,
is important. And so if like Rachel says, well, you know, I'm afraid of, I don't know, a spider, and I'll be like, okay, well, that's a reasonable thing. But then if she goes on to say, like, well, it makes me anxious to be around it. No, it doesn't. Because now we're thinking about, you know what I mean, a whole bunch of other
right.
things. You being afraid that this thing's going to bite you might be reasonable, or a snake, but then you being anxious to even see one or be around one isn't reasonable. So let's back away. In the actual moment, fears whenever, in the actual moment of something happening is whenever fear is present. Any
Yeah.
other time, it's anxiety. And that's whenever we got to be mindful of it.
Another big one that this article referenced was failure and allowing
Mm-hmm.
your kids to experience that. I was in a classroom observing this week, and I can't remember exactly what it said. I wish I could remember the exact words, but it was something like, failure is just the first obstacle or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
something to that effect. And, I think about all the times that I've failed in my life, like so many times. I mean, we've laughed about it on the show.
Cheers.
Let's just talk about not making cheerleading in middle school. Like, huge failure for me, right? Something I worked really hard at, didn't happen. But ultimately, it taught me some resilience in life and
Mm-hmm.
how you get on with it. A lot of my friends made the team. I still was there cheering them on.
That's
And
right.
so you have to learn, you have to fail at things to learn how to then deal with it later in life. I've
Mm-hmm.
also failed, technically failed every like big test I've ever had to take. I've always had to take it twice in order to get the, necessary score. So whether it was like the ACT to get into college, the GRE to get into graduate school, the praxis exam to get my license, all of those tests I had to take twice because
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not a good test taker. I'm
Mm-hmm.
smart. I'm prepared, but I get in there and my mind goes completely blank. And for whatever reason, the second time I take it, it's like, oh, I've got this. I can remember what I'm supposed to know. And so
Mm-hmm.
you can see how people easily give up, like, oh, I didn't pass. Like, this isn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have some of those built in resilience factors of like, well, I didn't pass this time, but I'm going to get it next time, like that's that no quit that I think that we want to instill in our kids
Yeah.
is to never give up, to keep pushing forward. Failure is not an option. I mean, failure is an option, but it's going to just propel you forward
Mm-hmm.
instead of, becoming like a roadblock. And so I think, just in not that you want to create ways for your kids to fail, because I don't think that that's great either. And I'm certainly not talking about them like failing a grade, because I think, if you listen to that podcast episode, my thoughts on retention, but failing at, maybe not making a sports team
Yeah.
or failing a test that they didn't prepare for. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it could be something very small or it could be something bigger that really, ultimately just teaches them how to become resilient and move forward and
Yeah.
deal with failure.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, us being their primary teachers, as parents, as caregivers, as providers, important people within their life, they have to know and see us experience those things.
Mhm.
And I think you do a great job of this, like with the meditation stuff. Know how we cope with it whenever we have those moments.
Mhm.
And that I think serves as the greatest lesson again for a child's overall wellness is seeing your parents kind of struggle with something, but then seeing how resilient that can make them. And then that then teaches them that internal lesson of how to cope in those situations or with that experience as well. And
Mhm.
I just, and I think for me, the quickest thing that always comes into play with this is that, and again, if you listen to our podcast, both Karen and I are type 1 diabetics. And um, whenever he was diagnosed and after he had his moment, which you can, I think it's in episode like 4, season 1, you can like maybe 3, you can listen to, but it was one of those things where he realized he was going to be okay because he saw me at times struggle with it and still
Mhm.
succeed. And
Yeah.
so I think that that is an important lesson. So even now, I can look at him and did like from whenever he was 12, 13, 14, whatever, I can look at him and know that he's struggling, but I have to allow him to struggle in order for him to know how to manage his condition.
Yeah.
And he had to see me do that in order to know that he can too. So I can't fix it. I mean, could I? Sure, I can run over there and check his blood sugar and then give him, you know what I mean, bolus
Yeah.
his pump, whatever. Am I? Nope, I'm not doing it. Now, if he
Right.
starts to go unconscious, then I'll start to do something, but it's got to be right to that line. You know what I mean? He's got to feel it in order to know it
Right.
because one day he's going to be on his own and about ready to pass out, and you got to get yourself out of that hole, kid. And that's just maybe that's where I just take such a hardcore approach to some of this stuff
Yeah.
is that it does come down to those experiences and him having to go through that is important for him to live, not just to cope with like daily life, but just to stay
Sure.
alive. And so I think I'd probably take that idea and then um, kind of push it out more globally. But that's
Mm.
just because at the end of the day, I don't know there's anything bigger than life or death. And that if you can
Right.
kind of deal with
No,
that, then all of this other stuff
we can work through.
we can work through. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but he had to see me struggle. He had to
Mm.
see the times in which I was in the hospital. He had to see the times in which, my blood sugar would mess up or it would be too high or what was going on, or it just hits you out of the blue. And so,
Mhm.
whether that's emotions, a medical condition, or whatever, you allowing your kids to see you go through something and then how you cope with it, I
Mm.
think is so, so, so important. So, at times I'll cry in front of the kids, and it's not very
Yeah.
often. It'll be about like, I don't know, sometimes we'll be coming home from a trip and I'll just be like crying. They'll be like, why are you crying? Are you sad? No, sometimes you cry because you're happy. We just had a
Mhm.
great time and it was a great memory. And it's not that I'm sad that it's over. It's just that I'm being reflective that this really fun time is now ending. And
Right.
so then it's like, oh, okay, so it's okay to have this emotion at that point in time too. Yeah, girl, it's,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's fine. Or you cry
Yeah.
then in a happy movie or at different points. And so again, it's not, or even if you're having a bad day, I mean, you can talk to your kids about having a bad day and what it's like for you. And
Yeah.
then it's like, we have superpowers, but I mean, I'm not walking around like I'm Shira, you know what I
Right.
mean? Or
We're not
Wonder Woman.
we're not gonna pretend everything's perfect all the time and not let them see, the daily struggles, whatever that is, whether
Hmm.
it's you're dealing with a mental health issue or you're dealing with a difficult colleague that has, really set you off that day. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many opportunities within a day to demonstrate for your kids healthy coping patterns or
Hmm.
habits.
Hmm.
And, I had a frustrating day the other day and was kind of stewing about something and came home and I had already meditated. I had already done all my things, but I just, I was like, "Mom needs a minute." And I went
Hmm.
upstairs and meditated and, got myself back together. And so, just being super mindful of like those teachable moments. I had a boss that I worked for many years ago, and she's like, you've constantly got to look for teachable moments.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's as an educator or as a parent, my husband lost his job. That was a real teachable moment for our kids to
Mm-hmm.
see things don't always work out the way you think they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't get every job that he applied for. I mean, it was what, 4 months before he got landed a job. And
Okay.
they got to see that. They got to see that struggle. They got to see him continue. They got to see him get frustrated. And so I think that's important for not just moms, but dads. Like you
Mm-hmm.
also are responsible for demonstrating emotion and teaching your kids how to persevere through hardships. It's not all our responsibility as moms, and not saying that everybody thinks it is, but I think a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
dads could play a really vital role. Let's say your kid's playing t-ball and you're pissed off that the umpire called something wrong or what. I don't even know if they have
Mm-hmm.
umpires in t-ball, but whatever it is, like you're demonstrating how to deal with your frustration every time, whether you go
Mm-hmm.
yell at somebody or curse at somebody, whatever it is, you're showing them that that's how you deal with these feelings. And so you have to think about that sometimes. And that is that really how you want them to deal with their feelings as well? Is that the healthiest way for them to deal with their emotion?
Absolutely. And I mean, I would charge them out at point, or whatever, but it is, you have to really kind of put in that everyone who is involved in a child's life, you are serving as um
An
an
example.
image. Yeah, I don't want to
Yeah.
use the word role model because we all just kind of like, oh God. But you're serving as an image for how they reflect and see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's also reflective of you as a human being too.
Mm.
So again, great, we're having to deal with this for kids and having to be this person, but you're also doing it for yourself at the end of the day. So if you're just trying to put on this face because you're a role model for your kids or for the teachers or your patients or whatever, and you're not doing it for yourself, it's creating this cycle that we're talking about. So it's got to be about you wanting to step to that line too, like we talked about, leveling up, kind of meeting at that place.
Mm-hmm.
And then that makes it more natural whenever it comes to life situations and circumstances. And making things relatable. I like what you said about the teaching moment, because it reminds me, like, I think that whenever we're kids, we see such a stark difference between what we go through in school and what our parents go through in work, but they're the same exact damn place. The social relationships, the friendships are based on proximity. There's a
Mm-hmm.
learning environment, there's a hierarchy. It's the same thing. We're just above the age of 18 and maybe now getting paid for something. But at the end of the day, the social environment and the pecking order is kind of the same. So you sitting
Yeah.
there, if your kid's having a tough time talking about something that happened at school, bringing up a relevant issue about a tough time you went through at work lets them see that, guess what? Yeah, it happens then and it happens now. And we're going to talk about how we are going to make this better for both of us. You know what I mean? Or what
Mm-hmm.
I did in this situation that helped me, what might work for you here. But again, it's not to paint the bleak picture that, yeah, you're going to have fights in school, you're going to have fights in work, you're going to have fights at home in your life, but to also say we are always going to have these different situations that create points of struggle or distress or that are just yucky and we don't like. Here's some
Mm-hmm.
that, I experienced at this point. It sounds kind of similar to what you went. Do you think it is? What have you experienced that sounds like this? Or what have even opened up to them? What's your yuck that you're kind of going through right now? Gosh, validate it. Don't just turn it on to being the you show at that point. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? But use that to kind of just be like, yeah, you know what? There was this time whenever I went through something like that. And then sit with it and be quiet and see if the kid asks more questions.
Yeah, and I think an easy trap to fall into in those situations is the comparison game, right?
No
So
one
it's so
uppers.
easy. Well, it's so easy to be like, well, when I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I 100% said that to my son the other day when he was complaining about going to soccer practice in 93-degree weather.
Ooh.
And I was like, do you understand when I was a kid? Like, we played outside all the time, all the time. There was nothing else to do but go outside. And if you tried to come in, your mom literally locked the door so that you had to stay outside,
Yes.
you know? I'm
Yes.
like, you can handle this for 1 hour.
Mhm.
But again, like it's so easy to fall into that trap. And I try to be super mindful of the comparison game because my kids are very competitive with one another. It absolutely drives us bonkers. They race home on their bikes. Anywhere, anything they're on, they race. Everything's a race. Did Jolie do it better? Did Jack do it better? Let's have a dance off. Who dances better? It is constant in our household, and we are constantly saying it's not a competition. It's not a
Mhm.
competition. But when we fall into the trap of comparing them,
Mm.
you're making it a competition.
Mhm.
Whether you mean to or not, you are. And
Mhm.
so, being super mindful of the comparison game, even if it's
Mhm.
you comparing their childhood to yours. Like I said, I know that I'm certainly guilty of that and am working every day to get better at that because I don't want everything to be a competition. They're going to do that enough.
Mhm.
Social media is giving them every opportunity to compare themselves to everyone else,
Mhm.
whether they're on social media or not. At some point they will be, whether they're 17, 18, 20, whatever.
Mhm.
It will be a part of their life at some point. And if we can instill at such a young age that it's not about comparing ourselves to someone else, they're
Mhm.
going to be so much better off. We're going to have so much less to worry about when they are in these environments or these experiences, that they're not going to feel that pressure to look a certain way, act a certain way, you know,
Totally.
do what everyone else is doing. So I think just being mindful not to compare.
Yeah. And I think that,
When,
yeah, totally. And you can create that relatability to an experience without comparison, like without comparing it. Like whenever
Mhm.
you were saying that stuff, I was sitting there thinking about a conversation I had last night with Cameron's girlfriend. But instead of saying, well, whenever we were in school, we didn't have phones to know where
Yeah.
Cameron left his phone in her dorm. So now there's no way to get a hold of him. We can't track him on Life 360. We don't know
Yeah.
where, we think we know where he's going, but we don't know. And we don't know how to get a hold of him because there's not landlines anymore. So she was like, she was like, I don't know if I can live in this world where there's not like technology. Like, and if I would have went, well, whenever I was a teenager, we had pager. Before that, there was nothing, a payphone. Do y'all know how to use it? But it
Right.
was almost more like, you know, putting into perspective, can you imagine what that would be like if that was like your reality every day? And she was like, no. And I was like, it wasn't so long ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or if you can still create that sense of relatability without making a comparison, the point still remains valid.
Oh, yeah.
You can talk to the kids
Absolutely.
like I was thinking of our parents, and our parents were not at all mean or
Speak for
whatever
yourself. My
abuse.
stepdad was so strict. Your parents were
My
strict too.
stepdad was very strict. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is where like if I were to say, could you imagine like having to walk home in the middle of the night and you had to leave out bread at your house to keep your dog from barking so that way you didn't wake up your parents if you had to? And the kids would probably be like, "What?" And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that was kind of what we did. But it was those situations, and I can sit there and say, well, you don't know what it was like whenever, we had to do all of these things. I did it
Right.
too. It's like that whole walking up the mountain in the
That's exactly what I was
snow.
thinking of. Uphill both ways.
Right, right.
Yep. 100.
But you can make that relatable by making it a funner thing. Like, can you imagine? Or what would you do if? And then it kind of brings it back home. And it's like, and you just can look at somebody and then be like, mm hmm.
Yeah.
It makes it more fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And to kind of wrap things up here, because I think we've touched on a lot
Mm
of the things that we can do to sort of help build these positive coping strategies or skills within your child. But I think the other thing to be mindful of is how and what you're praising your kid for,
hmm. Mm
right?
hmm.
So if you're praising them for their grades or how they performed on a test or the fact that they scored all the goals in their soccer game or they caught the biggest fish at the fishing tournament. I don't know.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, if you're only praising their accomplishments and not their um, character, I think
Mhm.
maybe,
That's
you
good.
know, that you're also giving them this idea that in order to be loved or to be worthy, they have to achieve something. And why, yes, we certainly want
Mhm.
to praise our kids when they do well in something, particularly if they've worked hard at it and it's something that's important to them. I think it's important to acknowledge those things,
Mhm.
but to also be mindful of acknowledging who they are as an individual, you know,
Mhm.
whether it's something that you particularly like or not. um you know, it's who they are, it's part of who they are, it's their character. And so praising them for things like being funny, although my
Mhm.
daughter's hilarious. When she was little, she used to get really mad at us for saying she was funny, but now I think she appreciates it. And
She's
you
so
know, so
funny.
just like things like that, or problem, my son is an excellent problem solver, and he has these really great ideas, and just
Mhm.
he's really thoughtful. And so a lot of times I find myself, you know, acknowledging that as well, because I want him to know it's really about who he is versus what he can do, you know? Again, going back to like strengths and weaknesses, like, I mean, he's not going to play on a professional sports team. At
Mhm.
least not yet. We haven't found the sport if that's the case. You know, and I know a lot of kids get a lot of accolades for sports and things like that.
Mhm.
And he does well academically. Um, but you know, that doesn't mean anything either, you know.
Mm-mm.
He, he right now he's in third grade. Like,
Yeah.
let's see how he's doing later. And so you know, just trying to acknowledge them for
Mhm.
personalities and what they bring, their kindness, their
Yes.
good spirit, you know, their excitement about things, like those type of things are really what you want to
Mhm.
make a big deal about, I guess.
Absolutely. If you see him hold a door open for somebody, or if he
Yeah.
shares something with another person, whether it's his sister or whatever else, or um, this week, if your young one gets grounded for doing certain things and then took the grounding well and knew that
Yeah.
you couldn't do things, I know you didn't necessarily like being grounded and, we've kind of learned from that, but you really handled this situation well.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing to sit there and say too. Thanks for not, I know it was really hard for you not to like argue or kind of talk back right then, but
Sure.
you did a really good job of just kind of sitting with it. And then we had a great conversation afterwards. That was huge. Like, that's what this is all about. Thank you. Finding, like you said, those nuggets that we can highlight some of those other achievements that they make
Mm-hmm.
can then help out in other areas. And so you may see like a plateau, like in my math ability, at like a D, right? A high D. Um,
Uh-huh.
it's you still
It's
pass.
passing.
It's
I like that. It's
passing.
passing.
But if you, and that might be where and I might even feel like that is my plateau. But if you allow me to achieve kind of like what you were saying earlier in another area and kind of praise and build my confidence there, that cup is going to overflow into the next one. And then I'm going to find a little bit more, or there's just going to be a natural desire of some type that gets created. Well, okay, now it's a C minus,
Mm-hmm.
but not because you got me the math tutor, it's because you let me go out and do this.
Yeah.
And so I think that, again, sometimes whenever we reach a plateau, it's not that we have to kind of dig harder in that one area. We need to branch out to another one to deepen its well, to make it stronger. And then that overflow will come into the next pot and help to rise it up to or raise it up to. So,
Yeah. I think too, I just thought of this while you were talking about that, and remembering that development is different for every kid, and kids,
mhm.
you know, experience emotions and display their emotions. You know, my daughter feels deeply, and when she gets upset about something, you know about it. But I have watched her change in the last like 3 months. Like, she is so much better at handling distress of any kind than she was 3 months ago. And, you know, for we have laughed for a long time. My husband and I will say, like her teenage years are going to be so much fun because she is so obvious when she's upset. And this week we had an example of this. So she tends to leave her bike right behind my car. And we talk about this all the time. Like, you have got to put your bike where it goes. It's going to get ran over, blah, blah, blah. This week, I always back in. So I don't have a sensor on the front of my car and I can't see her little bike. And so I am pulling out at 7 in the morning and I run over the damn bike. And I had to sit for a minute because, of course, I wanted to explode because how many times have I told her to put the bike up? And I sat there for a minute because I was like, I don't want to start her day off this way. She like just got up and is eating breakfast. I don't want to go raging into the house and scream, like, what are you doing? Your bike is now crushed. You're lucky my car is fine. Um, but so I had a minute and then I walked in and I said, Jolie, I would like for you to come outside and look what mommy just ran over. And she didn't have to come outside. She knew. And she typically would have burst into tears, told me I didn't love her and ran to her room. I mean, that's like a pretty typical reaction when something like that happens. And she just kind of like, she welled up and she was like, oh, I'm really sorry. I knew I should, she's like, I know I'm supposed to put my bike up. And I said, yeah, you are. I said, unfortunately, you guys aren't going to be able to ride your bike for a couple of days until we can figure out if we can fix it or we're going to have to come up with a solution. And she was upset. She was sad about it,
Mm-hmm.
but I had to recognize how much she has grown in 3 months and how that reaction did not occur. Now, it could have been the fact that I didn't walk in and yell at her that also
Mm-hmm.
helped her respond in a more calm manner. But,
Mm-hmm.
just remembering, because sometimes kids can really give charged reactions, which then like makes us react even more. We kind of like bounce that energy back and forth. And remembering that, like, I knew how I went in and approached this was going to impact her reaction to me.
Yeah.
And I wanted her to feel upset
Mm-hmm.
enough to stop parking her bike in front of my car.
Yes.
But I also didn't want to ruin her entire day and her to be upset or crying on the way to school. That's not what I wanted. So just a reminder, because parents say all the time, my kid is blah, blah, my kid is this. Like, we have a tendency to
Mm-hmm.
tell all the things that our kid does wrong. I'm guilty of it.
Mm-hmm.
Every parent is guilty of it.
Mm-hmm.
But to remind
Definitely.
yourself that kids are developing these skills and their distress to tolerance, and, give them some grace when they're like 4 or 5 years old. Coming.
Yeah.
And think
Yeah.
about how you're potentially increasing their reactions.
Yes, that's fair. That is very, very fair. And it's a I don't know, it's a struggle. It's
It's
a
a struggle. It
it's a
is. It's
struggle.
not easy. You're constantly evaluating your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's any behavior plan that you ever put into place. I mean, adults don't like to hear this. It's really about what the adult's going to do. You're not
Mm-hmm.
really changing the child. You're changing how the adult responds or sets up the environment for the child.
Yeah.
If you have behavioral issues, you have to really take a look at your behavior. And that's hard. That is really hard as a parent. That is really hard as a teacher, educator, anybody that is working with children. It is really hard to take a look at yourself and say, okay, what can I do differently?
Yeah.
And see if it's a change.
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, it's going to impact the behavior positively.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that 1,000%. I remember when I was seeing patients, a lot of times everybody's number one stressor is other people, right?
For
and
sure.
and we would talk about different ways in which they could express and share their emotions, and we'd go down this whole route. And I mean, if I could have been a fly on the wall, I know that many of these people would have done everything 100% the way that we just talked about. But at the end of the day, what it came down to is okay, well, now we're just going to have to change our total response to the situation. So
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be weird, but we're going to change the way that we are responding to every aspect of this. And then that is sometimes the only way that people change is if you change. And that sounds so counterproductive and intuitive. It sounds almost like we're being the one punished for their bad behavior or not
Right.
listening or how they're reacting. But the only way sometimes people change is through you changing your response to their situation.
I think it's not just people though. Like, how many people have you heard say, my dog is so bad? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, what's the trainer going to tell you to do? Right? They're going to come in and tell you some different behavior techniques
Mm-hmm.
to do and to reinforce their behaviors. When they display appropriate behaviors, you're going to reinforce that. So it's not just kids.
No.
This is also applicable to animals. If you have a whatever it is, problem wise,
Mm-hmm.
if it has any sort of brain, typically it's going to require a change in your behavior. I don't
Yep.
know. We kind of got off on a tangent there, but the whole dog thing really, it always gets me. People are like, your dog is so well behaved. And I'm like, yeah, because he gets exercise every day and we train him and he's not allowed on, we don't
Mm-hmm.
sleep in our bed. Like there's just some very basic things that any dog trainer will tell you is necessary in order to have a good behaving dog. Good
Mm-hmm.
dog, a tired dog. I stand firm on that. They're being bad, wear their ass out.
Wear them out.
Take them
Wear
to
them
a
out.
dog park.
That's it. That's it. Make your kids ride the bikes.
Mm-hmm.
Get them out of the screen time, whatever it may
Yep.
be.
Whatever it is, get that
But
energy
no,
out.
deaf.
All right. I think we've beat that dead horse. Hopefully,
I know.
it gave our listeners some ideas, just some things to ponder.
Yeah.
But we are raising tomorrow's adults,
Mm-hmm.
people that are going to wipe our ass when we're old. So, let's
100%.
do the
Yeah.
best we can.
Yeah. And my whole saying is I'm not raising kids, I'm raising miniature adults.
Yeah.
That's my mentality. And that may sound like it's a drill sergeant kind of thing, but I just see everything as kind of like a lesson. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what am I trying to teach today? Like, what are we, and that may even create its own thing in a sense. But I'm like, okay, there's something teachable, learnable, achievable about today. What's it going to
Yeah.
be? And so, and we're not perfect. God knows I'm not a perfect parent. Ask my son. He's 19 now. He'll be happy to tell you.
I was just
Um,
say, I get it wrong all the time.
Right, right. I'm sure our 9-year-old will come in here and be like, "Wow, Cameron might be a much more gentle about things in a sense." But so we're not going to act like we're perfect here. But I think
No.
that it's always comes back to reading articles like this, to having these honest discussions within ourselves and with each other, with everybody listening, and then now I think that this just serves as another opportunity for us. We've put it out there, we've spoken it. Now we just got to
Yeah.
level up and keep doing it.
Level up, baby.
That's it. Keep
Do this.
listening.
All right. Until next week, LYLAS.
We out.